Hey, welcome everybody. This is Luke, and today I'm here to drop some more information, I suppose. So, all right, but today I want to talk about a little bit about bonking and pacing in the marathon. And I guess you could probably for you. I think I just came across some articles in my news feed on the social media. And I'm always interested in those articles because I just want to see what they actually say. They're usually pretty good about providing links to the studies. But I'm big on just like what. Sure, the science says that, but what is practical? So a couple actually came across my feed that were related, and I just wanted to discuss them a little bit. So. I'm a big proponent of even to negative splits. And when we look at the world records and even just world class performances in general, they're usually run with even to negative splits. And the truth is that to do that's pretty tough. I think, and that's really across the board. When you're looking at elite runners, a lot of times they're reliant on pacers, and sometimes pacers get a little too aggressive, and then just the race falls a little too aggressive, and then just the race falls apart. But and sometimes it just doesn't work out. But in any case, when you look at the 3 to 4 plus hour marathoners, it's tough as well, and but the bottom line is it's hard to do. It's easy to say to do it, but how do we actually get there? And just to back that up a little bit, I created a poll in my Facebook group, and I asked some questions to specifically 4-hour plus marathoners, and 48% of them said that they positive splitted their fastest marathon by at least 5 minutes. So their second half was slower by 5 minutes than their first half. And so, it's not exactly great odds to run a negative split. And, and truth be told, I probably need to follow up with some more questions. Athletes trained to run what they did, and, whether they were using, one of my schedules, Hans's marathon method, Hal Higdon, Jeff Galloway, whatever. Be curious to see what they were doing and how that race unfolded when they did set that PR. But that's a big drop in time. It's definitely not the situation we want, and so it's easy, but it's easier said than done to run a negative split, and I guess that's the point I'm trying to make here. And then when looking at other data, so Outside Magazine, these are the two articles I was talking about. They had some pretty interesting information. The first one was Amby Burfoot. He was talking about bonking or hitting the wall, and he was citing some research that looked at 717,000 runners over the course of several years. So it's a lot of runners over a long period of time, which is good. That's what you're looking for in this type of research. And the main takeaway was that 28% of men, 17% of women would hit the wall during their career. So that is different than just slowing down the second half, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too. But they hit the wall, and when they hit the wall, they hit it hard, because they defined hitting the wall as a 5K segment of the race. So they looked at 5K time, 10K time, 15, 20, 25K, 30. So they looked at 5K time, 10K time, 15, 20, 25K, 30, 35 on up. And then the last, 2 point whatever K, the last stretch there. But hitting the wall was defined as a 5K segment of the race that was 20% slower than their beginning paces. And so that's a big slowdown, right? And so if you're running 20-minute 5Ks, that means slowing down to 24-minute 5Ks, and that's pretty darn significant. That's losing over a minute a mile. And by the data that in the research, it looked like people slowed down by a lot more than 20%, which is a huge. Just some other things in there. The average time lost was about 31 minutes for men and 33 minutes for women when they hit the wall. And that is boom. If you've ever done that and you've done to that extent, that is an absolute soul crusher. So when we hit the wall, I mean, that one thing you take away from there is that when you hit the wall, we're talking about hitting the wall hard, like basically going from a run to a walk. And so, we talk a little bit about slowing down at the end of the marathon, but there's a big difference between slowing down and hitting the wall. That's a huge, huge difference. And then the second article I saw was one from Matt Fitzgerald, again, an Outside magazine. They were looking at 4 to 4.5 hour marathoners tended to slow 15% over the course of the race, which is a significant number. 4:30, if you were slower than 4:30, that tended to be over 17% over the course of the marathon. So getting close to that 20% mark over the course of the marathon. So getting close to that 20% mark. So that's just slowing down, right? So 20% was considered hitting the wall, and you're still talking 15 to 17% slowing down. Even sub 4 hour marathoners tended to slow down about 13%, which is a big number. I mean, those are big numbers to lose over the course of the second half. And let's be honest, it's probably really the last 25% of the race that you're losing the majority of that time. But those are big numbers, but that's the average of all performances, right? So that's just the average performance over the course of all those marathon performances. That basically, hitting the wall is a big drop in performance. We're talking, literally going from a walk or run to a walk, and then there's still slowing down, and that still can take a significant portion. But the second part of that is that the slower you are to begin with, and I'm not using that, is that the slower you are to begin with, and I'm not using that in a bad way, I'm just, physically slower, the more you tend to lose. And that's interesting to me. Like, how do we overcome that? What are the other factors involved with that? Because I don't think it's just that a person's slower. I just think that there's got to be more to the story, right? Like, why are they actually? The thing that came to mind was another Outside article that appeared in 2016. And this was a look at all the Strava data compiled over the course of a year or two. And there was some interesting statistics in there. And the first one was that sub 3 hour marathoners ran the most, which is not a big surprise there, averaging about 50 miles most, which is not a big surprise there, averaging about 50 miles a week. But when you look at 4 hour marathoners, they're running about half of that. So I think it was right around 25 miles a week that they averaged. Also, the average miles that these 4 hour marathoners are running were closer to race pace in their everyday training. The closer you got to 4 hours, the more time you spent near or at your race pace. And then at 4 hours, runners tended to run faster or right at goal race pace in their training. And then 4 hour plus marathoners tended to do less than 5 miles in over half of their weekly course of the segment. It plays a huge role in how well a person can gauge in pace and effort, practice fueling, establish and clear break in paces. But just think about that. So 4+ hour marathoners, say they're running 25 miles a week, half of their runs are less than 5 miles a run, which basically means for the most part they're running a few times a week and then running a big long run on the weekend. So there's not that bigger consistency. That to me that's an automatic tell that they're not able to withstand the paces for as long as they possibly could, simply because they poured it. And that's a huge deal. So to me, it's less about being, it's chicken and egg type of thing, right? Like, are you a 4.5 hour marathoner because you're a 4.5 hour marathoner, or is it because you just aren't training the mileage, right? And I'm just basically looking at what the data's saying there. And the second thing that came to mind was yet another article. So now I'm on 4 Outside articles. Oh my goodness. And this time it's from Alex Hutchinson. And this article looked at the idea of critical pace or critical power. And this is the threshold that you can hold for about 30 minutes. This is important for a couple of reasons. One is that it's a very good indicator of marathon. For example, we know that elite marathoners can run about 96% of their critical pace or power for a marathon. And at the time of that being produced, we weren't sure what recreational runners could maintain, but I would say it's safe to suffice that it's not 96%. And the second part of that is that the longer we are on our feet, the lower our critical power or pace becomes. So in the study that he looked at, this was more for the sub 2 hour project a few years ago. But what they found was that after 2 hours, critical pace actually started slowing down by 9%. And so, how much might it drop for a 3 hour marathoner or a 4 hour marathoner? Even if it stays at 9%, if you went out too hard and you were already approaching that critical pace, and then that critical pace drops after you get to 2 hours, that 30, 45, 60, 90, 2 hours left to race, and you're above critical pace. And so once you cross that threshold, it's very hard to come back from it, and you just cannot withstand that pace. And that just means a lot more likely to at least slow down significantly, if not bonk or hit the wall. But I mean, to me, these are all interesting. It's all interesting, but it makes the idea of fatigue very complex. And so we can't really just put it on these. I mean, these are probably just parts of the things that are going on. And so then you have to throw in things like nutrition, mental status as far as mental toughness and resiliency and things like that. Or do we just shut down when it gets hard? All those things play a role in the fatigue. But these, I would say, are two big physiological drivers for a lot of the people in that 4+ hour range looking to get better, right? Like if we go out a little bit too hard, a little bit above where we're at, then it can make a big difference when we get later into the race. And so putting it all together, I think trying to already start that, but it's hard, and it's hard for me to. It makes my head hurt a little bit just trying to wrap my brain around all of these different facets of what can happen. But I think the main points are that the slower we are, what can happen. But I think the main points are that the slower we are, the more variance in pace, or basically the amount we're going to slow down, is going to probably increase unless we are well trained and pacing well. Running to even to negative splits is a lot easier said than done, especially at slower goal paces. And then third, slowing down is different than hitting the wall, but it is inevitable that you will slow down at some point, right? So where is that at? So 3:45, 3.5, 4 hour marathoners, where does that point? I'm kind of asking this as a question, but I personally think it's trainable. I think when you look at the average person based on that Strava data, yes, it's probably inevitable that person's going to slow down into that 3:45 to 4 hour marathon. They're not going to be physically able to run an even to negative split because the training does a driving factor. My coaching part of this, I want to get into that a little bit. So when I was writing Hanson's Marathon Method, I looked at the stats from Running USA, and the thing that jumped out to me the most was that the continual slowing of American runners. Now, granted, that number increased every year, and at the point, 5 years ago maybe, we were averaging maybe 550 to 600,000 people per year in the United States running a marathon, and then at least one marathon. And then you look back even to like the 1980s, and that number was well under 100,000 people overall, for the whole year. I mean, now you're getting 100,000 people overall, for the whole year. I mean, now you're getting, there's 2 races in the United States alone that get 100,000 people a year, right? Between Chicago and New York, and you throw in Boston, there's almost 140,000 people alone just in those 3 marathons, right? So numbers are huge, which is going to drive times down or slower. Data, that's just a telling sign to me that just people are training less and less and less, right? And so we are able to run a marathon, but we're not able to, maybe perform at our best at the marathon. I think the average time had slowed down close to 4 hours. So personally, I took that as my mission was to really change that. And I think when you look at this, what the Strava data, my mission was to really change that. And I think when you look at this, what the Strava data, I wanted part of my mission statement as a company is more to improve the average American marathon time. I would love to see that start trending the other way. But I think when you look at the Strava trending the other way, but I think when you look at the Strava data showed that we talked about and how we train, as far as Luke Humphrey running, or if you follow Hanson's Marathon Method books, they're 2 different universes, right? Like you're not running 25 miles a week. You're not running half your mileage at less than 5 miles a week. I don't think you even have a run that's under 5 miles at a time, right? So there's just two different universes, and I think that's a glaring difference. So I guess my point with that is, if you are following with us, that Strava data, you are bringing that Strava data up, right? You're not, and so you are going to be much more likely to be prepared to be able to run even to negative splits. And I wholeheartedly believe that if training is changed, then performances will start to drop. And so again, just looking at that again, just going back to the Strava data, if a person's running 4 to 5 hours at least, then that is about 10 miles spread out over the rest of the 6 weeks. That's not a lot of opportunity to get any other pace work done. That's not enough room to really get any length of tempo runs done. Your easy runs are so short that you're not really getting the most aerobic benefit you can get out of those. And so just by putting more volume, you get more opportunity for different type of work. You learn how to run tired. You learn how to gauge effort better. Because think about it, you're always fresh for that long run. Now you go into these long runs in our schedule and you're always tired for those long runs. So you know what it's like to perform while feeling tired, right? And so you learn those things. And that is form while feeling tired, right? And so you learn those things. And that is probably the second most valuable thing to learn, other than what it means to run the appropriate pace, right? And so that's a huge, huge thing. And then I think you also have a more realistic view of what you're currently capable of. Because I think if somebody's into that long run fresh, they're doing their long run of 15 miles faster or at race pace, I think they automatically think, well, I'm going to run faster on race day. But the thing is, you're fresh going into that long run every week. And so by the time you get to the race, yeah, you're good for 15 miles. But once you get past 15, 16, 17, 18 miles, the wheels start to come off much easier. Moving on from there, I think in terms of variance of pacing, or really, the slowing down of pace during the marathon, I do think it is easier for runners who are in the 4-hour range to unintentionally go out way over their head. So like when I was looking at the VDOT calculator, is a very popular calculator. And so I was looking at that, and basically the constant is you can run a half marathon 17 seconds faster per mile than a marathon. So if your marathon pace is 9:30, then theoretically you could run a half in about 9:13 a mile. And this doesn't seem to change much, at least on paper, is what the numbers looked like. And so that the faster you are, I feel like if you push too hard, that the price is going to be paid, right? So like if my goal pace was 5:10 as a pro and I went out at 4:53, that's literally the difference between running 2:15 and sub 2:10. That's just two different worlds, right? Like that's almost for me to go out at my half marathon pace. I can only sustain that pace for an hour, right? So I know that if I'm hitting that pace, it's going to be a miserable finish, because I know what's going to happen if I push at that pace too long. But if you take a person who's running 10-minute pace per mile and they constantly go between 9:45 and 9:30 training, but they're only running 3 or 4 miles at a time, when they do that, they're not going to think that much about it, right? Like they're going to think, oh, I'm good. This is what I run at every time. It feels comfortable. This is a comfortable pace. But the truth is, it's theoretically faster than what you can run for a half marathon. Now, granted, that half marathon is going to be closer to 2 hours, but I do think it just makes it easier to have that bigger variance in pace and not think that much about it. So if we say, first half, we want to be 10-minute pace and we're like 9:45 theory for the half marathon, and then expect to bounce back from that and do well the second half, it's probably not going to happen. But it felt comfortable, right? But you factor that in along with the idea that your critical pace drops about 9% after 2 hours. By the time you get to half, 25K, maybe up half, 25K, maybe up closer to 30K, all of a sudden that same pace is approaching or passing your critical pace, and that means fatigue's going to go up exponentially, and then you hit the wall, you hit those significant decreases in pace, whether it's 13% or over 20%, right? And so there's a huge that if you cross it, you're going to pay a significant price. But it felt easy, right? And logically you'd be like, oh, this is just what it is in training, right? So I can definitely see how that can happen, especially if you go into a lot of these runs super fresh and you don't have that fatigue in your legs to know fresh and you don't have that fatigue in your legs to know that it's going to actually be difficult, right? And so that's a big thing. Again, I think it's a big thing with how we train that makes it, you hate me during the training, but you are just that much stronger and you're better at pacing on race day. 60, 80, 120 minutes, and that critical pace starts to backtrack closer to what the pace you are running, and you cross that threshold, that's when the bad things are going to start to happen. And if you have another 60, 90 minutes to run, that's a long way to have to suffer, right? And so then you throw in those other factors as far as to get yourself out of it. And if you throw in poor nutrition with that, now you can't think clearly. You don't have the energy sources to keep you moving. You have to slow down to what pace you're going to burn primarily fat at. And it's just a whole complexity of issues that kind of snowball together at the same time. And boom, there you go. Snowball together at the same time. And boom, there you go. All right, so other things that you have to do in order to put yourself positioned to even or negative split. So practice how you want to race. So if you're a person who goes out and hammers your tempos, that's probably how you're going to race. And unfortunately, even if you're doing a 10-mile tempo run too fast, and maybe you sneak that, you're going to have to probably suffer through. So practice how you want to race. Practice running on those evens. If you make a mistake, fix it early. If you start out slow, gradually pick it up to where you're at marathon pace or even maybe a little bit faster. A great time to practice that is your long runs. Have your long runs get progressively faster. Like you started at a very easy pace, move into a moderate pace, faster. Like you started at a very easy pace, move into a moderate pace, move into your long run pace, and then maybe start creeping down closer to your marathon pace. That's a great way to do it. And then your overall average time is still going to be well within your moderate to long run range. And then the second thing I would say is use those same runs. So this fueling and fuel like you mean it, right? Like going back to that critical pace article, critical pace decline was actually countered by taking in enough carbohydrates. And that was countered at a rate of 30 to 60 grams per hour. And ironically, we were just on a webinar with our friends at the feed, and we were talking about Kipchoge, and they were saying that he had actually gone up to like almost 150 grams of carbohydrate per hour. So that's a ton, and I'm not gonna ask you to do that much, but I think a lot of people I work with, I know are more like that 30 grams per hour, and they truly, truly need to be at least 60, and then even maybe beyond that. And there's ways we can do it, and there's probably another source for another conversation. But just know that practice like you mean it. Like practice at the rate you want to take that fueling in. Practice at the volume you want to take that fueling in, and really get, like it's time of recording this, I think it's actually 18 weeks out from Chicago. Small levels, even if it's only 1 gel an hour, so 25 grams an hour, get that to where now you're at 35 and then 45 and then 60, and maybe even try to push it up to 75, 90 grams an hour. And even if you only get 60 grams an hour during the race, that's still over twice as much as what you were used to getting in. And your stomach's going to tolerate it so much better. And if you start now, your tolerance is going to build as your workouts build, right? So if you're starting now and you're only at like a 4-mile tempo run, 10-mile long run, that's short enough where if you have to suffer, you can still probably suffer. The tempo run, you probably won't even really suffer. By the time you get through the tempo, it's already going to be digested, right? Whereas, now you can push that out. You get up to a 6-mile tempo and you're doing, instead of 25 grams, now you're doing 35 or 40 grams. Now, you've tolerated a little bit more than what you're used to, and your stomach's going to be tolerated. So it takes about 4 weeks to really change your stomach and adapt to any training. So over that 4 weeks, if you push it from 25 to 35, and then you get that 4 weeks, you push it from 35 to maybe 45 or 50, and then on up from there, you can make a real big difference. And I'm not going to say it's not going to be painful at first. You might have some discomfort, but you would rather have that now than try to just grab 60 grams an hour on race day and completely blow your race because your stomach can't tolerate it, right? And so now's the time to suffer through that. Run different races. Take segments to develop thresholds like critical pace and lactate thresholds. So that means half marathon paces or 10K. So critical pace, that might be 5K to 8K pace for some of you. Might be closer to 8K to 10K pace for faster runners. And then lactate threshold could be anywhere from like 10K to 20K pace for the spectrum of people. And so you can get into those different segments. And if you improve those, now if your critical, say your critical pace was, 9-minute pace, and you drop 9% from that after 2 hours, in your marathon pace trying to run 10 miles, like you can see how that gets CP to say 8-minute pace, and all of a sudden you're still running it. Now maybe you even increase your marathon pace to 9:30. Now you have a minute and a half difference, where before you only had a minute difference, right? And so you're going to set yourself up to be able to tolerate mistakes a little bit better, but you're also going to have a better understanding of what you can actually do too. And the fourth thing I have there is kind of different. I feel like you have to have a healthy relationship with technology. Like having technology is great. Putting your 100% reliance on technology is tough. And by that I mean, like, if you're going by heart rate, pace, or power, and even pace to some extent, like having instantaneous feedback on pace probably isn't the best thing. If you can set that up where it's going to let you know if you're 15 seconds too fast or 15 seconds too slow, and you don't have to look at your race, you can just kind of get into a groove and follow into it. That's not a bad thing. Or you just have what the mile pace was. But if you have instantaneous feedback, it's just so much variance that you're always looking and you're always adjusting, right? And so you never kind of learn. You're always just kind of relying on what the technology is telling you. And so if you do use the technology that much, use it to the fact that you're using it to correlate effort to what those paces are saying, or what that power is saying, or what that heart rate's saying. But for me, it's more about evaluating afterwards. I mean, pace for monitoring, splits and things like that, but heart rate for monitoring afterwards, and evaluating workouts, power for evaluating workouts, things like that. And you can kind of learn how to get into a groove, gauge effort based on, or gauge pace based on efforts. And if you can, I truly believe if you can do that, you're truly at marathon pace, you're not creeping up, you're not slowing way down, you're going to be so much farther ahead than a lot of these people in the marathons, right? So I think those are the four big things you can do. And nutrition, the whole thing we had to do with that webinar today really, really opened my eyes. And I think it's so key. Like we have to be better. We have to start early with training our gut. We have to be on it right away and get a segment. So the 9 and 10 mile tempo runs and the 16-mile long runs. No, we need to do it sooner. We need to be 100% on that. And we need to do it with aggression, I would say, a controlled aggression. And you also need to do it with what you're planning on using race day, right? So if you love Martin taking GU from what they offer, then you better be learning with GU how you're going to make that work, right? And so, or how are you going to handle carrying or having support set up where you can have what you need when you need it. And so I think that really was an eye opener today. And so I think that gave me a lot of ideas for some discussion. And so I think that gave me a lot of ideas for some discussions moving forward. But I think we can definitely start doing some stuff. But I think right now, in the general scheme of things, start working on it right now. Even if it's just getting your stomach to tolerate that much volume, build into it. All right. So wrap this up at the end of the day. We know that marathon performance is a complex mixture of physiological, environmental, physical, and mental properties. Like you could do 100% of what I just talked about, right, and still have a crappy day, right? Like if you get you get a bad weather day, or and it just doesn't work out for you. But it's just a complex set of issues there. But we also know that we get tired and these things change, right? Like our form changes, our ability to take in food changes, or take in fluids change, and it just makes it hard. But if we never train in a situation where we're in a similar state, meaning super low mileage, only doing fresh long runs, that type of thing, then we never really are used to it. And when we try it on race day, it's a big shock to the system. So we need to shock that system before day, right? And do it probably several times so that our body is well aware of how it's going to tolerate it. Um, it is more time consuming, but it's so worth it when you put a great race together and you're able to hang tough over those 10 to 15K. So, I've had races where I've completely fell apart the last 10, 15K, and I've had races where I was 10 to 15K, and it's like just the experiences, those things are just so night and day. I hate those experiences where it's bad. That's a silly thing to say, but you know what I mean? It's like I don't have very fond memories like that, but I have great memories of when I ran well, like in 2006, like in 2006 Boston, where I just held it together so well, or San Diego when I ran my PR. Like I hit 22 guys, and I dropped a 455 miles at 22, and I honestly could have kept going, but my quad started cramping, and I just backed off just enough so that I could get across the finish line. But mentally, I was still there. Mostly physically, I was still there. I was tired, but I wasn't able to not push. It was just like I was a little bit dehydrated, and my quad started cramping a little bit, and like I could take it right to that edge, but I felt like if I took it over that edge, I was going to be walking that last mile. I knew I had a heater going, and I just wanted to make sure I got across that line because I knew I was going to PR, and I knew it was going to be good. I just had to make sure it was going to happen. If I pushed too hard, it wasn't going to happen. But you know what I mean? It's just our memories and our experiences are so much different in those different situations. But the lastly, I guess by the looks of the data, most people don't put themselves in a position for success just because of the training that they're doing or not doing, I guess. And it just doesn't support what they want to do, right? Like you've probably heard me say this before. Like a lot of times I find people are training to survive a marathon and they're not training to perform at a marathon. And so if your goal is just to go out, raise money for a charity, check it off a bucket list, that's fine. Like, I'm not going to sit here and judge you and say you have to do it a certain way. Just know what you're getting into, right? Like it's probably going to be pretty hard the second half of that race, particularly the last quarter to a third of that race is going to probably be pretty tough. But if you're looking to break a barrier, start getting close to qualifying for Boston, get under a Boston qualifying time, this is the stuff that matters, and it matters the most, right? Like in order to continue to be successful, right? So just going out and running 40, 50 miles a week isn't going to get it done anymore. Now it's going to be properly pacing my workouts, properly fueling my workouts, properly increasing all those other thresholds by racing other distances, making marathon pace feel that much more comfortable, giving myself more leeway. Those are the things that are going to give you the most benefit now, because the mileage itself, you've really kind of almost plateaued at that. You're going to get the amount you can gain by just adding mileage is less and less once you get past a certain point, right? So where are you going to get most bang for your buck? Is it going to be going from 60 to 80 miles a week? No, probably not. It's probably going to be staying at 60 miles a week? No, probably not. It's probably going to be staying at 60 miles a week and then doing all the smaller things right? And that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. So, all right, so I don't stop rambling on that, but you get what I'm saying. And I think the last thing I would take away from that is just like when you see the headlines about how hard it is just to even pace, and you see how really are discovered that the article is. If you see, I try to do that. I try to put that into a practical aspect for my athletes and people who are following us. But my big takeaway is I saw that data about fading, but then I want to see like how are these people training, right? And you look back at that Strava data, and it's like, okay, well the training for most people doesn't support what they're actually trying to do. The training for most people doesn't support what they're actually trying to do. And if you're following us, you're doing the training to support what you want to do, and I can promise you that. So just keep that in mind as you are moving forward in your marathon segments, and particularly as you're starting a marathon segment. When I'm recording this, is prime time to think about what I said, those 4 factors in training. So practice how you want to race, practice your fueling with the right authority, with how you're going to do it in a race, and get really good at it. Run different races. So right now, if you're in the beginning of a marathon starting point, but you want to run some 5Ks and stuff, that's perfectly fine. We have plenty of other discussions talking about that. And then have a healthy relationship. 5Ks and stuff, that's perfectly fine. We have plenty of other discussions talking about that. And then have a healthy relationship with technology. Don't let it dictate everything in your run. Maybe just save some of it for after the run and look at that data too. But just have a healthy relationship with that and learn to correlate effort with that data. All right. So also I'm sharing this as a blog post as well. And I have all the articles in a couple of my blog posts linked at the bottom of this, so you can take a look at those articles for yourself. All right. That's it for now. I appreciate you listening as always, and I will talk to you